this is really a curious kind of a thing because this is probably factual, but it doesn't matter that it's factual if it is. And the reason that it doesn't matter is because the powers that be are going to use this 15% idea to try and recruit those 15%, or the people that believe that they're in that group, on their side. And it'll come at a crucial point in the revolutionary process where the powers that be will be ultimately revealed, and they'll say to these 15%, look, you're special. You've got 15% of your DNA is alien DNA. Now you need to align with us because we also have alien DNA. Of course, we have more, so we're higher up, and you've got to pay attention to us. But nonetheless, you're more like us than you are like them. And so this divisive wedge is another one of those divide and rule, or, divine right of kings kind of things that's being upgraded to this new century. And the idea will be that, well, kings don't have a divine right to rule, but kings have a ET right to rule, so to speak, because they're blessed, I guess, is how the term would be, with a greater level of alien DNA. And so it would just rack out into, again, to a hierarchical society where there's a very elegant few at the top, the 15% below them who are going to be their new level of minions, and then the 85% of just regular humans. And there's going to be, linguistically, their forecast now, that they're going to attempt to use this to get people within the 15% group to go along with the idea of being brutal to the humans, because after all, they're primitives, just on the par of higher order primates, and that's about it. And that's really a disturbing meme on one level, because it doesn't bode well. It'll come out during the repression and the suppression of the enlightening phase here over this next 6 months, 8 months. But at the same time, it's also very heartening because it's about as naked a manipulation technique as there can be, and the fact that they have to resort to this level of stuff means they're getting very close to that resource constraint whereby they'll start to fail. Make sense?
Oh, that's the important part right there. That is very good, because it is a very trite method, since it's been used so much throughout history. And that's good if people hear it.
Sure, once you're exposed to the idea, then you're free of it.
Yes. So that's good, because, it's always that enticement of, oh, I'm special.
Sure, the separation, exactly.
Yes.
And what we really need now is we've got to consider a bunch of different things now, actually, as humans. And one of the things I like thinking is that, well, you just don't get any more, old, raspy, and bald, and ugly as me. So I'm sure I'm in that 85% group. And I want to be in that 85% group because humanity as a whole is obviously favored by universe. Otherwise, we wouldn't have lasted this long. But obviously, or not obvious, perhaps, to some people, but let me say rather that I have conclusions that this interesting area of space that we're in has yet to get to its peak of interesting and strangeness, and that when we do, perhaps all kinds of really strange stuff will be revealed. Now, I think that this is part of the process of humans going from the Class 0 civilization to the Class 1 civilization. And Class 1 is to take it from being planetary and destroying the planet to survive to being planetary and harmonious, zero-point energy, repairing the environment, this sort of thing. And also beginning to be extraplanetary in a sustainable way. And so Class 1 or Type 1 civilization is kind of like Star Trek. You don't necessarily need money, and everybody gets together and they all decide, okay, let's build ourselves a big boat and go cruise around in space and have fun. And other people decide that, well, they're going to clean up the oceans and, reset this particular component of the habitat here, or go and explore Mars, or this kind of thing. So it'll be a really fun time. The problem is, and perhaps this is just part of the way that universe is structured, is that there's these idiots in the form of the powers that be that stand between us and this Class 1, or between us and the step into Class 1. And the step into Class 1 is going to be horrific. We've got a lot of work to do. Most of the planet is not yet ready, but apparently there are enough that we're starting to see some of this stuff come out. So I'm rather hopeful that also along the idea of the 2013-2014 period of time, we may actually be seeing our first cohesive thoughts and planetary work into going into class or type 1 civilization. And it means that we've got to get rid of a lot of stuff, though. In the process, we've got to shed the idea of monarchies. We've got to shed the idea of specialness. We've got to shed the idea of any sort of religious hierarchy. We can keep religion. That's fine. I don't want to get people pissed off at me, but I'm saying that as long as everybody's out there worshiping the Pope, you are not ready to be a type 1 civilization. As long as you're allowing an imam to tell you to be a suicide bomber, you're not ready for a type 1 civilization. And as long as you're in a secret society worshiping a goat and perverting justice through suborning the courts and the political process, we're not ready for a type 1. So a lot of this stuff has to fall away just as a mechanism of our going through this evolution. Unfortunately, I don't think it'll fall away in a nice and clean and pleasant way. I think it's going to be rather chaotic, but nonetheless, good for us in the end.
Well, it could be that everyone will suddenly decide to start conquering themselves. It's possible.
It is possible, and in fact, we may even be seeing it. That's the weird part.
Yeah.
Is that this whole increase, just from a statistical viewpoint, this whole increase that we've seen in the growth of the immediacy language and its accuracy may be just a symptom of that.
It's interesting, too, what you said about that change from 1998 to the year 2000, and then it's increased since then. And the year 2000 was a big deal, but nothing really happened. Yet, perhaps that prior 2 years was people thinking about that year and what would happen, and maybe that stirred up a little more consciousness around the place.
It could be, but there's also deeper, stranger, more woo-woo components to that, and that is that 1998, and I think you can find it's March, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but one of the early months in 1998 was our official entry at the earliest possible point into the age of Aquarius. In other words, one of the orbital, one of the far distant orbits, Pluto or Neptune or whatever, shoved its nose into the age of Aquarius, and over this last 8 or 10 years, the rest of the solar system's been following, such that on Valentine's Day of this year, Earth actually made it into the age of Aquarius. So kind of spooky that we saw all this stuff coincident,
Well,
wow.
The universe is fantastically, brilliantly spooky sometimes.
Yes, and beyond our ability to comprehend.
Yes.
Anybody that tells you otherwise is a fool and needs to be not listened to and locked up, probably.
That's why it's spooky, because it's our lack of understanding of it. But it's fascinating nonetheless.
Yeah, and the complexity, I think, is just, it's marvelous. It is the greatest work of art, yeah.
And it's so fractal. God, it's...
And there's an interesting thought, too. I got into this debate the other day with this follower of Stephen Greer. Now, Stephen Greer is this guy who goes on Disclosure. He runs the Disclosure Project, I think. He's associated with it. But in any event, he's a doctor, I think, PhD, not a medical doctor, but I'm not sure. In either event, he gets out there and says, don't worry, aliens are good. We need to, everybody cooperate and everybody meditate the same way, and we can get the aliens to come on down. And I don't think he says that we'll all share pie, but basically we'll all get together and have a picnic kind of a deal with these nice aliens. But you bring up the issue of fractalness. And we've all heard the as above, so below, but I also think that there's a reverse level of that as below, so above. So in other words, it makes more sense to me, whether it's accurate or not, it seems nonetheless a wise thing to do, to phrase or to look at the universe in a specific way. And that is that we've got a bunch of really screwy nut jobs running around here doing nasty, awful things. So there's no reason, since the universe is fractal, I'm presuming that there's components of the ET world or extraplanetary universal civilization that also has a bunch of really weird nut jobs running around doing not so pleasant things, perhaps a little bit more constrained, but nonetheless they're still out there. And so I would disagree with Greer on that particular point. There's no evidence that every ET is beneficial to humans, and there's all kinds of evidence that exist on our planet that we should project outward insofar as our ability to analyze what we're about to encounter. And that's the issue, is what we're about to encounter. Because I think over these next couple of years, contact is coming out in an undeniable way. And I don't think it'll be officially announced by anybody,